100 years ago today, 100 years ago today, February 28th, 1920, Governor James Robertson called the state's all-male legislature into special session to ratify the U.S. Constitution's 19th Amendment. This was going to grant universal suffrage. So Oklahomans had previously approved a constitutional amendment to the state constitution, but the fate of the U.S. constitutional amendment was not certain. I will tell you what is for certain, that since 1908 on this very campus, women were being educated, women were being valued, women were being empowered long before they ever had the right to vote. So I just want to do just a quick shout out. Yeah, we can do that. Thank you. Yeah, yes. We were educating women before they could vote. I think that's something to be very, very proud of. Our students stand upon the shoulders of giants, these alumni who decided to challenge the norms, to shed the expectations of society. They came to this campus, they met each other, they formed lifelong friendships, they got their education. So I can think of no better place to celebrate this milestone than this campus, and it's my honor to welcome you to Votes for Women in the 21st Century, an Insider's Perspective. Yeah, okay, very good. During tonight's panel, we're going to hear from 5 women who know a little something about challenging expectations and defying society's norms. We'll leave some time for questions after they finish talking, but let's jump right into it with this special message, video message from one of our friends and Chickasha's own Congresswoman Kendra Horn.
Hi everyone, Congresswoman Kendra Horn. On behalf of myself and all of my friends at USAO, I want to say welcome to this amazing celebration of the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. As many of you probably know, Chickasha is my hometown, so I love that we're taking the time this evening with all of these amazing elected women officials on the panel to talk about what the 19th Amendment means, the work that we've done, and coming from this place that was formerly the Oklahoma College for Women, that built a strong foundation for so many women across this state to do things that had never been done before, and the impact that has on Oklahoma, on Chickasha, and in our country today. I am only sad that I couldn't be there with you this evening. Sadly, I am in DC, but I'm with you in spirit and look forward to hearing about this exciting evening, and love that Mara Liasson is here as your special guest. So again, my best wishes to all of you, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Congresswoman Horn. We really do miss you being with us tonight, but we understand. So will you please join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists as they make their way to the stage. And as they're coming up, very good, yeah. As they're coming up, I do want to direct your attention. We have an exhibit in the back that is a nice showcase of some of those amazing women that have gone before us. So I encourage you to take a moment and check out that exhibit. I'm going to do a real quick introduction of each of our panelists, and then we'll jump right into it. Representative Emily Virgin currently serves as the House Minority Leader and represents the state's 44th District. She was first elected at the age of 25, and at the time she was the youngest representative in the Democratic caucus. Representative Cyndi Munson became the first Asian American woman elected to the state legislature in 2015, and she represents District 85. A first-generation college student, we have a big passion for first-gen students on our campus. She earned her bachelor's and her master's and is currently serving as the Minority Caucus Chair. Councilwoman Nikki Nice represents Oklahoma City's Ward 7. She is the 10th woman and only the second woman of color to serve on the city council since its incorporation in 1890. Prior to her campaign and subsequent election, Nikki spent 15 years as a TV and radio personality in the Oklahoma City metro market. And congratulations, I think she was just recently named one of the Journal Record's 40 Achievers. Yeah. And I know. We've got some firsts up here. So congratulations and welcome. Before she was advocating for education at the Capitol, Senator Carri Hicks was advocating for students as a public school teacher. So she spent several years in the classroom before she decided to run for office. She's currently an adjunct professor at Oklahoma City University, where she teaches in the College of Education. She also serves as co-chair of the Legislative Diabetes Caucus and was also recently named to the Journal Records Achievers Under 40. Sorry. I was just trying to slip myself in there. No. I had just had a conversation last week about how it's really sad when you age out of any of these things, so it's probably just me trying to jump back in. And finally, last but not least, our Labor Commissioner, Leslie Osborn. Now, prior to her election as Labor Commissioner, Leslie served as state representative for District 47 for 10 years. She was the first female chair in the House Judiciary Committee, the first female to chair the House Judiciary Committee, and in 2016 was named the first Republican female chairperson of the House Appropriations and Budget Committee. So what a panel of firsts, right? Hello. Welcome, ladies, and thank you again so much for your time. So I just want to jump right into it. We as a university take a group of our students to the state capitol every year to represent USAO for Higher Ed Day. And it's really, really great, those of us that have gone. It's so fun to see. Every year we go, there is one student that has this light bulb aha moment. And this year, that aha moment was this: no one in this building looks like me. How can they represent me? So my question to the panel is, what do you say to that student? And how important is representation in our government? And how do we continue to move the dial? Representative Virgin, would you take the first one?
Sure. Do I need to turn this on?
I
or
think
is it already on?
You're set.
Can you hear me? All right. I've never been accused of being quiet, so. Well, thank you all, first of all, for being here tonight. I can't think of a better way to end a week of the legislative session by being here with people who want to celebrate such a momentous occasion. I sort of had the same moment when I would visit the Capitol as a young person and in college, and when I started doing research on whether I wanted to run for this office, that, wow, there really aren't any young women at the Capitol, and let alone, women of color, a diverse group. It is not, and so that was really what led to me thinking, well, I've got to do this, because there are a lot of young women across the state who have that light bulb moment, and I think it is up to us to be the voice not just for our constituents in our actual districts, but for people across the state who need representation. And so what I say to that student is that, yes, it does look bleak at times when you come to the Capitol, but it's actually getting a lot better for women at the Capitol. And it's because of the women who are sitting here on this stage, because of women like Kendra Horn, because of the work of organizations like Sally's List, being intentional about recruiting women to run for office. And so when I have that feeling, because I do oftentimes, that, wow, we still have a long ways to go, I remember that there are a lot of people who are doing the work on the ground to help us solve that problem. And I think that there are a lot of people at the Capitol who are also realizing, man, it sure makes a difference when there are women at the table. And I've seen that difference personally. I think everyone at this table has seen that difference personally. And so what I would tell that young woman is that you're right, we're not the majority, we're not even close to the majority, but every woman at the Capitol, I think, takes their role very seriously to represent people across the state, not just in their own districts.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Councilwoman Nice, how would you respond to that student who was just really disheartened about government representation in general?
Well, I would say it's really the same thing at City Hall, because I am the only woman of color that sits on our city council. So I literally represent all women that have melanin, any kind of melanin. I mean, seriously, if you're Asian American, if you are Hispanic, if you are African American, whatever background, I represent you, because I also have that melanin. And that is not an easy burden to bear, because I know about me, I know about my culture, and I try to represent as much as I can as a young woman in this space, but I know I still don't have the wherewithal to represent all of those other nationalities and all of those other women and their issues and whatever it is that I need to fight for at City Hall for them when it comes to policy. So myself and Councilwoman Jo Beth Hammond, who was elected in April, who is now the youngest woman to ever serve our city council since 1890,
Wow.
and she serves Ward 6. I mean, we are here and we are intentional about our space that we hold, and we just know that it's not an easy space to hold, so we don't take it lightly. And especially for me, I never thought this would be something that I would do as far as running for office, but because there was a need for representation and for us to be at the table, for us to be in the room, and for ladies to be in the room, and also consider Meg Sawyer. She was Ward 6 prior. She sat on that city council as the lone woman for 10 years before I got elected. And she came off a few months after I was elected, and that's how we ended up getting another woman in that seat. But I can't even imagine 10 years serving by yourself as a woman, as the minority, still holding that space for all women, not just women that you serve or that look like you, but every single woman. So it's very intentional, and I know when it's ever mentioned that I'm the second woman of color to ever serve, I'm like, please, no, don't clap. That's not good. Like, this tells you that we have a long way to go if I'm only number 2 since 1890. You know, that means we're not there yet. We should not have to say 2. We should be in 10s and 11s and 20s and 30s and 40s. We should not be where we are. So I'm very intentional to tell the young ladies, don't clap, because I need you to hold these spaces too.
That kind of segues into my next question. You know, women have, a lot of times, it's easy to put yourself last on the list, right? I'll take care of everyone else. I'll take care of the kids and the husband and the family and the whatever. So what is it, and Carri, we'll start with you. What is it that made you, as a woman, go, oh, I can do this. I'm putting myself first and we're doing this? And then follow up, what made you decide on that particular office to run for?
Well, this is my state representative, so that's a pretty easy answer. I'll start there. So let's go back to the first question. So I announced our campaign to run, and then found out we were pregnant. So that was a twist in the plot. It's not in the lesson plans. But I mean, I think coming from a background in education where obviously, you know, my primary role is to inspire my students to be curious and to be thoughtful and to ask good questions and to demand honest answers and to demand respect and kindness. That's what I want for all of our students in Oklahoma, to have, you know, that curiosity that ignites their passion to drive whatever, you know, they want to pursue. And when I felt like, you know, I couldn't ever make progress from the classroom on getting individuals to understand how difficult the job had become, how the work environment had changed for teachers, and that resources were becoming more and more scarce. You know, I had basically used all of the avenues that I had available to me from the classroom and exhausted the possibilities for advocating for my students within not only the 4 walls of my classroom, but obviously I was holding district leadership positions to inspire my colleagues. And it had gotten to the point of, you know, they're just not listening. And I used to tell my students every single day, you know, be the change you want to see in the world. And it was really hard to look myself in the mirror and not live out that same philosophy. And so it felt like I was disappointing my students and my school to step away from being in that room and being at the helm to, you know, instruct my 28, felt like 50 by the end of kiddos at a time. To do something bold that was scary, that was not a guarantee. And I flipped a seat that had been held by Republicans for 28 years, and I was the first female to hold this seat. So, I mean, it's pretty powerful that when women run, they win. And our campaign was always about putting families first. And that was the kind of change I wanted to see at the Capitol, prioritizing healthcare, prioritizing education. And I just kept thinking, like, I can't wait for a candidate to show up on a ballot if I'm not willing to put my name on the line. So enough is enough, and it's time to do something really brave and be the change that I wanted to see.
Thank you. Thank you. Leslie, I'd like to ask you the same question. And then I'd like to, what precipitated the change between serving and running for labor commissioner? How do you choose what you want to run for?
So we'll start with House of Representatives.
Yeah.
I had my own business in Tuttle for 19 years selling heavy-duty truck parts. I'm a big believer in God sometimes, or we put paths that we never saw coming. And I had this degree in business, and I was going to be a loan officer a few years before Penn Square Bank fails. They weren't hiring in banks for years, and they certainly weren't hiring in small town banks for women to give loans. I got hired to open accounts at a bank in Tuttle because that was better for women. Now, at this time, it's totally changed, but just in the trajectory of those 20 years. Ron Justice, a friend, came to me. He was a sitting senator and said, we'd like you to run for our House of Representatives seat. I'd never given a speech, never done anything political since OSU and the student government, and that was a trillion years before. And it was a big consideration. I have my daughter here with me. She was a senior in high school. My son was in college. And I remember sitting down with her and saying, I won't miss your games. Amber Pocasset, Aunt Panthers down here. We had her proms right here in this ballroom. Oh. And so I'm sure I was doing crepe paper, and balloons and all that. And she said, go for it, Mom. And never looked back. So that kind of started a path I wouldn't have expected but loved. When I came in, there were 11 women out of 149 in the legislature. I believe it's up to 23 in the last decade. That's progress.
I'll take it.
The older I've been and the more around this and the more I've moderated, to be honest, we will never be truly representative until we fit our demographic. And that means by gender, that means by sexual orientation, that means by the color of our skin, that means where we worship. And I believe that. That's why in families and businesses, people bring different perspectives to the table from how they were raised, from how they live. And when you just have, and I'm sorry to say this, let's see, I know a couple of you in the room, middle-aged, white, successful entrepreneurial males, something's wrong. And we're not getting a full perspective, even if they go home to the wife that makes their dinner. Sorry. We need all the voices at the table. Now, the thing I think is interesting is it's not that women can't win. In Oklahoma, women do very well if they follow the template, if they get out and work. Nobody I know knocked more doors or continues to than Cyndi Munson.
Yep. Yeah. It's a true story.
She is a rock star on doing that. And I admire that because so many people get caught up in what 23rd and Lincoln feels. And 23rd and Lincoln is not what we should be thinking about. It's about what people in all 77 counties need. Government's not the problem. Government is the fabric that keeps a society functional. Whether businesses will stay here, whether your children will stay here after their education. It's that fabric. And right now, government's under attack. We're the bad guy. We're evil. We got to get rid of the heads of agencies. We need to keep cutting. Guys, we're 45th to 50th in everything. And until we have more women and more people to stand up, that's not going to change. We have to invest more. But that being said, I was fired as appropriations chair my 10th year, between my 9th and 10th year. After chairing the two most powerful committees, I was very blessed to chair those. It wasn't going to be real fun, I'll be honest, to sit on the back of the bus the last 2 years and never have a bill heard, because that's how it works. So I had a friend that was running the Department of Labor, and she said, you've ran multiple bills for us. You know our mission. You like what we do. You set up a whole division there for the natural gas industry. Why don't you come over and run for this? I'm not running again. it was a natural fit, another unexpected path that you've got to be watching for sometimes, and it's been great. I love it. We've got a beautiful mission, good people, and we're trying not to make eye contact with anyone in the Capitol. Just keep us. Don't file bills. We don't want an increase in our budget. Just let us do our work, and it's working so far. So anyway, that's my answer.
Thank you. Speaking of Representative Munson, I'm going to share, if you'll indulge me, one of our favorite quotes. I happen to know it's one of her favorites because we talk about it on Instagram all the time. It comes from a speech by Theodore Roosevelt. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out the strong man stumbling or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself with a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with the cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. So what I would like to pose to the panel, and starting with Representative Munson, tell us about a time that you were face down in the arena. And how did you navigate that?
Today or?
Perceived.
Well, I was born May 24th, 1985.
Well, we have, but to say, we have, we can read your resumes. We know you're amazing. But I think that's what's really inspiring is to know, how do you get back up when it doesn't feel good? And there are many, many days, I think, in these positions, well, and for all of us, right, that just don't feel good and we don't want to get back up. So I'm really interested to hear about one of those times for you.
Yeah, okay. Well, where are the tissues also? We got mints and water. Misty, where are the tissues?
We'll get you some tissues.
I'm just kidding. Okay, first I want to say thank you for having us. And Misty and I worked together for a long time for the Girl Scouts of Western Oklahoma, so we have been fighting for women together for a long time, so thank you for having all of us. Gosh, I could think of a few things in my life, but since we're talking about being in office, I guess, you know, talking about being elected and when I got elected and what happened in 2015, many times people forget what happened in 2014, and I believe it's the best thing that could have ever happened to me, which is that I lost my very first election that I decided to run. And certainly now, as I reflect back, I've been elected 5 years now, and I think about what happened in 2014. I can also trace back just childhood memories of things that I put myself out there and I tried and I didn't get it, or I wasn't the best at it. So it's something that I think builds resiliency when you try and quote unquote fail, but you continue moving forward. My story is that I was recruited to run for office, so Sally's List, who's here, it is because of them that I made this decision to run, because I certainly liked politics and thought about running for office at some point in my life. But going back to that very first question that was asked for us, there are no Asian American women elected until now in the state legislature. There are very few, maybe one. I think there's one judge elected in Oklahoma County. But other than that, there wasn't anyone who looked like me or had the background that I have in terms of my childhood and my family and things like that. And so making that decision to run was really difficult for me, because I thought a lot about what I didn't have. I wasn't married, still not married, I don't have kids, I have student loan debt, and I just made up a list of things of why I shouldn't run, and turned them over and realized it's the reason why I should run. And because of the things I've had to overcome in life, I had a really tough childhood. Growing up, I grew up in domestic violence, and my parents divorced, and I struggled a little bit in school because of that. But it built strength in me and helped me to remember to lean on people who believe in me and who want to see the best in me, and also believe in my potential. And I felt that as I was running in 2014, which is what pushed me to run and continue my campaign, even though doors were slammed in my face because I'm a Democrat and everyone loved the incumbent I was running against. And donors would tell me I couldn't win, so they weren't going to invest in me. And I just kept getting these no's. But I realized that if I kept moving and I kept persevering, eventually someone would say yes. And even though I lost, I think I was pretty successful in the amount of votes that I got and the support that I received. But I think sometimes, if I'm going to do something, I want to win. I want to be successful. I don't want to just go halfway. But losing in 2014 really helped me to realize the lessons you can learn when things don't happen the way that you think they're going to happen. The unexpected path, the lessons that I learned. And when I had the opportunity to run again, I just came back stronger. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and I knew where I needed to focus, and I took those naysayers and the doubters, and they were my fuel and my energy to keep moving forward. So that was a time and it was really hard because I'd put so much energy and time and sacrificed so much just to lose, but I think I really gained a lot.
Thank you. Let's just talk a little bit. I'd like for you to share some specific ways that you've been able to find your voice in this role. How are you navigating day to day this primarily male-dominated career? Representative Virgin, take that one for you.
Yeah, well, I always hate it when people do this, but I'm going to go back to that last question because I have to talk about.
Please do.
Because it involves one of my fellow panelists. A time that I failed because I was running a piece of legislation that was going to update the HIV/AIDS curriculum in the state of Oklahoma. We've had mandatory HIV/AIDS curriculum in Oklahoma since 1987, but the statute hasn't been updated since 1987. And as you can imagine, we've learned a lot about AIDS. Actually, the statute doesn't even mention HIV. So it's just AIDS education, and so I was running a bill to update that, bring some of the science and the facts and what we know now into that education. And then Representative Osborn was a big supporter and encouraged me a lot on that. Unfortunately, we were not successful when that bill got heard on the floor. I think we were 10 votes short, and Leslie was in her office, and I went off the floor, and after answering all the questions and debating and knowing that what I was doing was the right thing to do, but I just couldn't get through to a lot of people. And a lot of that had to do also with who I was. Mm-hmm. I knew that. And so after the bill failed, I went down to Leslie's office and I was crying, which I hate crying at the Capitol because people see it as a sign of weakness, but really I cry when I get mad. And I was so mad. And so I went down to Leslie's office and had a great chat with her. And she encouraged me, and I think that's really what it's about with the women at the Capitol, is that we are there for each other in a bipartisan manner, and knowing that sometimes you cry.
Yeah.
And it's not because you're sad or someone hurt your feelings. It's because you're pissed off. And so that's what happened. But that also speaks to dealing with the environment that we're in at the Capitol. Because I've been in the legislature for 10 years, and as a couple of my constituents said that when I knocked their door, you looked like you were 12. And I certainly did. And I'm not sure why anyone voted for me, but I'm thankful for it. But so coming into that environment as a young woman, one of the youngest people at the Capitol, a law student at the time, was really difficult. And so I knew that I was going to have to work harder than anybody else. And I think everybody on this panel knows that as a woman in politics, you have to work harder than anybody else. When you are campaigning, you have to work harder. When you're at the Capitol, you have to work harder. And so that's what I did. I knew that I wasn't going to be granted that automatic respect that older men are given when they get elected, that, oh, well, you're a guy, you must know what you're talking about. We don't get that. And so we really have to prove ourselves. And so I took that very seriously. And I talked to a lot of women, but also, luckily, I have an amazing dad. And we talked a lot about the questions that I could go ask in the Judiciary Committee as a law student, as a first-year legislator. And that quote that you read, my dad actually just gave it to me to put on my refrigerator, but he changed the pronouns so that it's her. And so I have that hanging on my refrigerator, and I think
It's hanging like that in my office too.
Yes, yes. And so it is difficult, but I always go back to the people who aren't at the Capitol and who don't have a voice at the Capitol, and that regardless of whether anyone in that room is actually listening to the things that I say, the people outside the Capitol need for me to say those things. And so that's what keeps me going, even when it feels like, man, I'm lonely. I'm less lonely these days, thankfully, but it can get lonely. But thinking about those people whose doors I knocked, and the people who send me emails and say, I don't feel represented by the person who is supposed to represent me, but I feel represented by you. And so that is such a high honor, and it's such an important responsibility that it really trumps everything else.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Leslie, as she was telling us that story, it kind of struck me that you were a mentor to her. Absolutely. But who was your mentor? Who was there for you when you were navigating and finding your voice? Because you were there, you were kind of sailing that ship alone for a while.
So when
I
I
was so
came
proud
in,
when she got fired.
that's a hard question, because when I came in, I didn't fit in with the women that were there. There was a lot of kind of the little older ladies caucus, and they were lovely, nothing wrong with that, but I just never really fit. So I went out, my whole class that came in were all men. I tend to run around with the men more. And one thing I do like about working with men is that men usually get the job done, say a few cuss words, have a beer, and go home. Sometimes women can be harder on each other and things, and so it's not all bad. We definitely need men in the legislature as well. But, going back to this, what was the hard thing? There was a bill in my last year that I bled out for, and it was a bill that would discriminate. It would allow any groups that did adoption services to discriminate for LGBT. And that's a passion that's very strong to my heart, that does not affect your parenting. And I got it killed once. I got it killed twice, and if y'all haven't figured out, whenever a bill gets killed, it should be dead. But there's always manipulative people that will keep inserting like anti-vax language or another abortion bill or another whatever. Guys, if you want to save my soul, go do it in a pulpit on Sunday. You want to save Oklahoma, come to the damn legislature. We have roads and bridges to fix, and schools, and mental health. So I lost that one, and it's still a heartbreak to me that we didn't get that changed. And it's ridiculous, and that's not our job. It's called the separation of church and state. Look back at why we started our country. But I have to remember the good things, and one of my neatest bills was the first Pay for Success bill in Oklahoma, that the Kaiser Foundation worked for us with a public-private partnership, a fabulous program called Women in Recovery, where when women go to this program straight from jail, they hardly ever end up in jail again. They teach them how to be parents. They have to be educated. They have to have a trade. They learn how to check their kids' school list and how to cook a healthy dinner and all the things. They didn't grow up like we did. See, we all want to believe everybody grew up just like us. And our prisons are full of people that were sexually abused, physically abused, mentally abused, emotionally abused, and we're letting them all out of jail right now. And I voted for that. But it's not going to work if we don't give them the resources to change their trajectory. See, in Oklahoma, we don't want to do the resources. We like to say maybe they found Jesus in jail, and they'll go back to their family that'll pay for their 4-year degree. That is not right. That is wrong. We might be lucky if 1 in 10 does that, and I hope they did. It doesn't change till we put our money where our mouth is to change their path. So that bill allowed 100 women a year to divert from the Department of Corrections to the Kaiser Foundation program. It costs less money than incarceration. We are now in our 2nd year of changing 100 lives, and when it changes them, guys, it changes the cycle for their kids and their kids and their kids. So when I lost those big ones, at least I could go home and say, damn it, if I didn't get anything else done, that one's going to make a difference.
Yeah, thank you. Well, let's talk about what are some specific things, how do you deal with the negativity? We all know that social media is got the best of It's the best of times, it's the worst of times. I know that I've been about to, my Aunt Carla would say she roostered up a little bit over some of the things that I've seen people commenting on all of your Facebook things. So what I need to know is how do you deal with it? What actual things do you do that you can get through the negativity and get your job done? Nikki, would you start?
You would start with me.
I'm ready to go. Do you want a minute? I'm like, I'm good. I'm here.
I just talk back. I mean, I just talk back. I mean, literally, I have one person this past week that called me the Wicked Witch of Washington Park. And I said, really? It's Booker T. Washington Park. Get your facts straight. So it's to this realm I did not expect, but I don't know why I didn't expect. And thank God for my mother, because she's always like, get off of the Twitter. And she found out about that last tweet, and she said, who were you on Twitter arguing with? And I said, huh? She said, I know you hear me, and I know you were on there. I said, look, Mama, I'm not just going to let them say anything to me or about me. I'm not going to let them tell a story that's not true. I will defend myself for that. But I am learning that not all comments need a response. And that is really, really hard to do. And I want to go back to the question, too, what was a hard point. And my hardest point was literally sacrificing my career to do what I'm doing now. You know, I was doing radio, I was doing TV, and I was very successful in both. Yes. And literally having to resign from TV as I was running, and then losing my job the next day after I was elected, that was not something that I expected. I expected for $12,000 a year for city council to supplement my income, and then I could worry about everyone else. And then I literally turned into 24 hours of worrying about me. And that's not something that I wanted to do. And here we are a year later, and I'm still worrying about me, but I'm doing it with the passion of my community in mind, thinking of those who are worse off or in the same position that I'm in. How can that fuel me to make sure that we're providing better for them? You know, luckily I have a support system, but I think about those that don't. I think about those that are continuing to struggle. I think about those who have small children and can barely make ends meet. I think about those incarcerated mothers that I've talked to and I've felt and I've touched. I think about those seniors who I've talked to, I've felt and I've touched. Those are the things that rip at me every single day, because I know that there's something or someone that they need, and they're not crying out because they're used to doing what they do. And those are, again, those are things that fuel me. So also, when people tweet at me, that fuels me too. So that's how I get by.
Carri, do you want to take some of that too?
I do.
I saw you.
I do. I'll save the good part for last. So I mean, again, coming from an educational perspective, like I always try and seek first to understand. You know, maybe they didn't really mean for this to sound this way, clearly. So I kind of try and use the reverse psychology approach in engaging them, you know, either offline or a lot of times, you know, we have their phone numbers, so I'll just call them like, hi, it's me. It's me from the social media.
Do you scare them when you call them?
You know, it does, because I mean, I think that they forget that there's a human on the other side of that. I think the assumption is like, their campaign team or their staff is doing all this for them, and I can speak quite honestly in saying that all of us maintain our online presence individually. So I mean, it does feel personal, I mean, when you're receiving that response. And so I've taken that approach. That's been successful part of the time, because, you know, I think the worst environment to try and have a critical conversation would be, you know, in a screenshot, right? And so, you know, reminding them that I'm human and giving them an opportunity to explain, you know, their side of the story so that they can be heard and they feel validated, but then to also, if necessary, kind of redirect and say, like, I hear and understand what you're saying, but let me fill you in on the rest of the side of my story, and maybe we can meet in the middle somewhere. And I think that's effective. The hardest part of my very first session in the legislature, the governor has appointed 17 of my constituents to serve on his boards and in commissioner roles and in state agencies. And if that sounds like a large number to you, it should. It's a lot to come from a very small concentration of folks. And I carried 15 of those very easily. I had a problem with 2 individuals, and I did not know I was making history. I think that's also kind of, I'm just like, I'm new here. I don't know how this works. But I took the pro tem seriously when he talked about we are going to be vetting these nominations. We want to make sure that we have full faith in their ability to discharge their duties. We will not be a rubber stamp, and many of these appointments and nominations take confirmation of the Senate. I called them all, and apparently there's a tiered system that came out at the end of session. So I just called them all, from textbook committees, individuals, teachers, my people serving on textbook committees. I just wanted to hear why they wanted to serve in this capacity. So I talked to them all, and for 2 individuals, I found that I didn't believe that our perspectives aligned for them to serve on our State Board of Education. And so I declined to carry those 2 nominations forward. And again, we made history by declining the nominations, and that the custom and tradition of the Senate has been that if that senator declines to carry the nominations forward, it doesn't advance. But that didn't happen. So they're currently serving on our State Board of Education because they had someone else run the nominations. And it got a little ugly for a minute. And, I just had to believe that the things that were said about me in the newspaper from the governor's staff were said in order to protect power. They're not true, and so you just have to remind yourself, I know who I am. I know why I did what I did. I would do it again today because it was the right thing to do. And unfortunately, that makes people very nervous that you don't have a price tag or that you don't have some kind of, carrot at the end of that stick. If I cannot go home and look my 3 children in the eye and know that I have done everything in my power to fight for their future, then I absolutely need to leave the state legislature. And I, with a clear conscience, can say that I have continued to live out my values, not only in words, but in deeds.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, we have, we're going to do one more, and I'll let you jump in with that answer, and then we're going to have a little bit of time to take some questions from the audience if you have any questions, and that we'll do that right before our keynote. So for the final question, it is an election year. We have a lot going on, and everything that you hear is always leads out to voter turnout, to get out the vote. Voter turnout, it's always an issue no matter the election. As it was only 100 years ago that we could get out the vote. What do you tell anyone maybe that you've knocked doors with, or that you've been one of your constituents, or that you've spoken with on social media, when they say, my vote doesn't count, why do I even bother? Cyndi, how would you like to take that?
I just want you to know I have a lot of notes up here from all these other questions. I'm so excited. And I know we shouldn't do this, but I want to brag on Leslie Osborn one more time, because when I was my first session, I had a bill that died on the floor, and she looked back at me and said, "You recapture that bill right now." And I was like, "Okay, I'm recapturing it." and she said, "We're gonna go." There are 2 men in her caucus who I said the words "federal government" together on the House floor in the Oklahoma legislature, and apparently that's a no-no. And so they decided to pick on me and kill the bill to help homeless youth, and cried also. I cry a lot at the Capitol and everywhere. But Leslie helped me, and I didn't know what to do. I felt like a failure, and I I went and talked to them, and they're like, we're just giving you a hard time. We're just having fun. It was just fun. And she went over there and explained to them what they did and helped me. And she told me, your bill will pass when we put it back on the board. And so I just want to say thank you for that. And you have done so much for all of us. In terms of voter turnout, so I've been the annoying person that's like, you need to register to vote since I was in college. And so it's kind of a natural thing for me to do. But I hear it a lot when I'm out knocking doors, and definitely from young people, people who are marginalized. They don't feel like their voice is heard. They don't see that representation in their state legislature in terms of a majority fashion, whether it's at the state legislature, city council, or at at the congressional level, or even in the White House right now. And so it's really hard to convince people to motivate themselves to leave their daily lives, which is working, providing for their family, doing the things that they need to do to survive every day, to go vote. That's a luxury for many people, and something that takes a lot of human connection and real life stories and real passion to convince someone to leave their job or to do whatever it is that they're doing to take the time to go vote. And so when I'm out knocking doors, I have Senator Hicks and I have a constituency that's pretty engaged. Some of you are in the room, which we're very impressed by. Yes, and so that's the kind of engagement that we have, and it's great. But there are still folks in my district that don't have that level of engagement because they never had someone knock their door, or they didn't have somebody come by and talk to them about what they care about, let alone ask what they care about. And so when I run into those situations, my tactic is to ask, what are the 3 things you complained about today? And it usually has something to do with roads, schools, taxes, something where we're making a decision on their behalf. And so I try to help them see that their lives, everything that they do in their daily lives, that this little finger right here decides for them. And yes, we need to pay attention to our congresspeople and the president and all of that, but to remember that those of us that are the most closest to them make the biggest impact on their daily life. And so I try to do as much as I can in terms of engagement, and I think that that's really the key. When there's human connection and there's passion behind what it is that we're working on or what a voter cares about, whether we agree or disagree, that doesn't matter. But they have to show up and they have to vote, and that takes, I always say that civic engagement is a two-way relationship. I have to do my work as an elected official to come out and tell you what I'm doing, but you as a citizen have to do your job too, and you have to come and tell me what you care about and make sure that you vote. So I try to personalize it as much as I can.
Very nice, thank you. Leslie, do you want to?
I was just going to say, every House seat represents around 38 to 40,000 people. Todd Thompson won by 2 votes in Ada. I helped somebody that was running against Sean Roberts last time. They lost by 61 votes. That's, how many families that we did. I know, everybody can shake your heads on that. Anti-vaxxer bills, gun bills, abortion bills. But all that being said, that's just, 10 families you didn't get out. That's just, it's such a small number. And we think about that, that's 40,000 people that could vote. Not the kids, that are under 18, but it's still. And you look at that and it's like, it's first of all extremely disappointing when you do knocking lists and you see how many people aren't registered. Because you assume you're just going to go walk down through all these neighborhoods, but no, they give you a list, and if they're not voters, there's no point in taking the time. If you're in a Republican primary, you only knock on the R's, you can do the D's after for general, whatever it is. But it's shocking to me how many houses you walk by and people don't vote. So just remember, and you all wouldn't be here, so I'm speaking to the choir, you better not complain. Not one damn time do you complain if you're not out voting every time those polls are open. Shame on us. Look at the people in countries that they have to stick their thumb in a pot of blue ink to prove, and they treasure the right to vote. And we're too busy watching Netflix. What the hell? Don't complain. Teach your kids. My daughter, Katie. Sorry, I keep cussing. I know she's looking at me like that's my mom. Katie, have you ever missed voting? I beat it into my kids. This is our civic responsibility, but it's also something we should treasure that we have the ability to.
A side note, we have a voter registration table out in the lobby. If you need to get that taken care of tonight, if you're a student and you need to make sure that that happens, it is an election year. Let's get you registered. So we have that out in the lobby.
And Misti, if I may comment on
Please
that
do.
as well, I wanted to say, the former city councilwoman Willa Johnson, when she first ran, she lost by 1 vote for Ward 7. And there was a recount, and she wasn't successful, but the next time she ran, she was successful, becoming the first woman of color to serve for Ward 7, and that's another thing. The only 2 women of color have come and represented from 1 ward. So we still need diversity from our other wards in order for this seat to take place. But I wanted to make mention, I know we talk about votes for women, but I want you all to realize African Americans still did not have the right to vote. It was in the 1840s that Frederick Douglass made a speech at Seneca Falls in front of the ladies and said, you know, there should be a right to vote. We should have a conversation. And therefore, that's how they convened to start the conversation for women and African Americans to have the right to vote. However, as they continued through that process, they realized it was a lot of dissension between how it was going to take place between African Americans and the rights for African Americans while fighting for the rights for women. And they disbanded, and then there became other groups that started that process as well. But when you think about even the ladies that had the suffrage movement, African American women were still not seen as women to be a part of this. They could help, but they still were not seen as women to be a part of the struggle. And when they had the march, when they marched, they told the ladies to stand in the back. The colored women had to go to the back. They had to be at the back of the march. But there was a lady by Ida B. Wells who said, no, we will not. We will not stand at the back. We will stand with you, and we will walk with you because we are women too. So I think it's very important for us to realize, even as we celebrate rights for women, there were still a lot of women who did not receive the right to vote. And that's why I believe it is very important in my community to talk about why it is so important for us to understand that people literally died. Their blood is on the ballot for us to say we have the right to vote, and people still do not realize it because it's just a picture. It's something that's not something that they can feel per se, to say that they've been through that struggle. So that's one thing. Ever since I stepped on college, my first day of college at UCO, when I first started school, I registered to vote. And as much as I can, I'm like you, Cyndi. I'm always, are you registered? You have a felony? How long? You know, yeah. I'm trying to write it down. So you have so many. Okay, I'll come back and I'll make sure you get it. And one of my friends, I'll end with this. One of my friends, he owns a restaurant. He's part owner of a restaurant, Ice Event Center and Grill, and he has a felony. Yeah, somebody's eating there. And he has a felony, and he ended his paper time, and his first vote was to cast his ballot for me. And you don't understand how good that makes you feel for someone to be intentional to say, I have my right to vote back, and I'm going to cast my ballot for you. And I can't believe I'm getting emotional about that.
I'm getting emotional over here.
But that's what we do. That's why we do this, because we're here to represent those who can, not to say they can't speak for themselves, but to amplify those voices that are unheard. That's why we're here, and that's why we're going to continue to do the work.
Amen. Thank you for that. So does anybody have any questions for our panelists? Any questions at all? If not, then I will. We have, look at that.
I know people in this room. I'm like, no questions.
Test, test. Okay, here we go. Look at me. I'm like Phil Donahue.
I know.
Yes, ma'am. What is your question?
So Representative Munson mentioned this a little bit in that you got letters and you wanted to hear from us. And so my question is, it's an election year. What are the biggest issues you want your constituents to be aware of? And do you actually read our letters? Because I once wrote to a representative and I got back what read very much like a form letter. And so I wasn't too sure if it was actually read or just, oh, here's the address,
Was it a
send her
man?
a form.
Yeah, if it was a man.
If it was a man.
First, I will say I'm positive we all read our letters and emails and phone calls and voicemails. And I will say a practice in my office anyway is if you send a form letter, we probably send a form because it looks like we're just trying to touch base with each other. But people who write personal notes and letters and emails, I love them. It's like, oh, they really are talking to me. They're not sending this to all of us and in a bulk fashion. So yes, we do look at them, and we don't have the benefit of having staff. So, and sometimes I'll get a sarcastic, like, you're probably a staff reading this. I'm like, actually, nope, it's me. I'm reading it, and I love emailing those people back to let them know it's me. And then I think for this election, I think, the most important things that we're talking about at the Capitol right now, number one is health care and what the governor is trying to push onto us versus what the people want. So I think it's very important that if you want to improve access to health care in Oklahoma, pay attention to what's going on at the Capitol, specifically what we had to deal with this week in terms of the Sooner Care 2.0 and what the governor's trying to do. There are going to be a lot of ballot measures initiative petitions that will be on the ballot, including expanding Medicaid, State Question 802. There will be some more criminal justice reform measures, State Question 805, and then the group that's working politicians, or people not politicians, for independent redistricting, which is actually something that could really transform the way your state government looks. That is, yes, something that I think the people of Oklahoma, regardless of party, should really pay attention to, because the lack of representation is not only, one of the main reasons you don't see diverse representation is because of who we're recruiting to run, who has the ability to run, but also the way our districts are set up. They are not competitive districts, not all of them. There's a few of them that we represent that are competitive, but for the most part, they're pretty partisan, and that needs to change in order for the legislature to look different and to work on the issues that the people want, not ideological beliefs. So.
Thank you. We have time for one more question from the audience. Here we go. Oh. Yes, come on. Oh.
You kind of touched on it, but I'm interested in the Medicaid question. When is it going to be on the ballot, and why has it not been placed on the ballot already?
Man, that's a really good question. There's a guy named Governor Kevin Stitt who would know the answer to that, but I don't think anybody up here knows the answer to that. The short answer is that it's all about politics, that the governor doesn't want this question on the ballot. I think that the governor does not want this on the ballot in November. I think they would rather have it in June, but as we saw with the medical marijuana question, it doesn't really make a difference which ballot you put it on. But what you're seeing right now at the Capitol, as Representative Munson said, is an attempt by the governor to tell the people, well, you don't need to vote yes on this because we've come up with our own plan. It's his plan, and it is meeting some bipartisan opposition in the legislature right now. And frankly, for people like me who have been at the Capitol for a long time, we've had a decade to do something on that issue, and we haven't done anything. So I think that we've lost credibility. I think we've lost the opportunity to act on that. So the short of it is that the governor has to put it on the ballot, but he still gets to drag his feet on which ballot he puts it on. So
I just want to tag on to that for just a minute. I served on the Healthcare Task Force. I serve on the Health and Human Services Committee in the Senate, and the response, the proposal that is not public yet, so none of us have been able to see what the proposal will include, for me is very concerning in that the idea behind states block grants are that, the federal government will give us a block, a lump sum of money with no strings attached, right? Like, trust us, we are going to be good stewards of this money, and we will meet the needs of all of our people, and we don't need federal regulation or accountability for that matter. And so for a parent like myself, my son has type 1 diabetes. Obviously, it's a chronic illness. It comes with a lot of complexities, and being able to just have, tight control over making sure that his we're mitigating long-term challenges and complications like blindness and obviously neuropathy. But the only way to truly cap expenses in the long term would be on exclusion on eligibility. So folks like my son, who is very expensive because he requires a lot of medicines to be able to live day to day, or it's either eligibility or benefits. That's the only cost savings mechanism, because our federal government hasn't done any regulations on price gouging, fee for service. I mean, I could talk for an hour on just that subject alone, but I'll sum it up by saying the census is upon us. The census is here. If you are not aware, Oklahoma was, the second most undercounted state 10 years ago, and that's been reflected obviously in the ways that we can invest here in our state through our federal dollars. So it's estimated that it's a loss of about $1,600 per individual that's not counted. The group that is most undercounted is children. So kiddos 0 to 5. For whatever reason, don't show up on those complete counts. And so we need your help in making sure that we continue to talk about the census, that we encourage our communities to participate. It'll be live online, which is super exciting. I mean, in real time is what they say. We'll be able to know who in our neighborhoods is filling out. I mean, it won't give you any kind of specific information, but as I understand it, it'll kind of show you, who's completed their census forms. And so that's something we all need to be paying attention to, because we lost a lot of revenue, and it shows in our lack of investment in those critical needs. So whatever you can do in the circles that you run, that you have influence, please remind folks, especially families, to make sure that they are completing that census information, because it really does impact, our senior services, our federal monies for school lunches. I mean, it impacts our daily lives in a really, really, really big way. We need your help.
Thank you so much. Everyone, please, let's give them a round of applause. Panelists, thank you so much. You're so awesome. I'm so excited. I know we're all so excited to get to listen to our keynote as our panelists make their way back to their seats. I'll do just a quick introduction. Mara Liasson is a national correspondent, political correspondent for NPR. Her reports can be heard regularly on NPR's award-winning news magazine programs, Morning Edition and All Things Considered. All Things Considered. Liasson provides extensive coverage on politics from Washington, D.C., focusing on the White House and Congress, and also reports on political trends beyond the Beltway. Each election year, she provides key coverage of the candidates and issues in both presidential and congressional races. Please make her feel very welcome to our stage, Mara Liasson.
Thank you so much. I really feel like I shouldn't say a word. I mean, to me, that was the most hopeful, optimistic, inspiring, uplifting hour I have spent with elected officials like in the last 10 years. I mean, really, I'm just, there was more political courage and political candor at that table than you can find in Washington, D.C. So this is why all is not lost. This is the future, and these are the leaders who are going to help us out of the mess we're in now. So I am here to talk about the 19th Amendment. And I am really happy to be here to celebrate this wonderful centennial. And I want to do something that I've never done before, and I do speak to a lot of groups around the country, like yours, but I want to dedicate my remarks to two amazing women One who is no longer with us, Cokie Roberts, who died way too early just this past year. She was my colleague and my mentor. She was a trailblazing journalist. She was the daughter of a female member of Congress, Lindy Boggs, who represented New Orleans. She wrote many, many books, including Founding Mothers, Ladies of Liberty, Capital Dames. You can find them all on Amazon, and they're all about the contributions women made to this country and its politics. And the other is my mother, who is not famous like Cokie, but who is still with us at 93. She was born 6 years after women got the right to vote. And the reason I want to honor her is for one simple reason, which is that for my entire childhood, until she went back to work, and even after she went back to work, she was an active member of the League of Women Voters. And so I grew up as a League of Women Voters baby. And I never thought of myself as a latchkey kid, but when my mom was at a League of Women Voters meeting, I would come home by myself and let myself in and get a snack or whatever, and I never felt abandoned because I knew where she was, and more importantly, I knew what she was doing and why. So, to my mom and to Cokie, let's talk about the 19th Amendment, how it happened. First, let's make something really clear. The 19th Amendment did not grant women the right to vote. Women had the right to vote as American citizens. No one granted them anything. Here's what the 19th Amendment said. Quote, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Congress has the power to enforce this amendment by appropriate legislation." So the 19th Amendment also did not guarantee anything. It didn't establish women's right to vote in the affirmative, like the right to free speech, or the right to assembly, or the right to due process, other rights that were enshrined in the Constitution. The 19th Amendment simply told the states that being female could no longer be a reason to bar citizens from voting. So there was nothing in the Constitution before the 19th Amendment was passed that directly barred women from voting, and as a matter of fact, women could and did vote before the 19th Amendment was ratified. Now, who were the first women to vote? Believe it or not, women had the right to vote in New Jersey from 1797 to 1807. This is called the New Jersey exception. And it is a fascinating little piece of American history. So for 3 decades after the American Revolution, the women of New Jersey had equal voting rights as men. New Jersey was the first, and for a very long time, the only state to explicitly, through a piece of legislation, enfranchise women, or at least some women, for at least some period of time. Now, this August, there is a new exhibit opening at the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia, just in case you are on your 19th Amendment history tour this summer. And the exhibit is called When Women Lost the Vote. So here is what happened. On July 2nd, 1776, 2 days before the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, New Jersey's own framers issued their first state constitution, and they gave the right to vote to all inhabitants of New Jersey, as long as they, and that was the pronoun they used, not he, and in 1779, New Jersey made that even clearer by saying as long as he or she had property worth 50 pounds. We didn't have dollars yet. There was no racial exclusion. But what it did is it effectively ruled out married women because they were not allowed to control any property or income by themselves. Now, slavery was still legal in New Jersey until 1804, so it obviously ruled out enslaved people, ruled out married women. The principle by which married women could not control property or income was something known as coverture. So there are actually poll lists from New Jersey that historians have found, archivists have found, going back to 1776 and beyond, and on those lists there are names of women. So we know women didn't just have the right to vote in New Jersey, they actually voted. And here's what the archivists found that was really striking about these lists. the women's names are always clumped together, as if they went to the polls in groups. Were they friends? Were they all relatives? Did they go to the polls in groups for safety, like women walking each other home at night? Or was this the first instance of American women organizing themselves for an election? We don't know, but whatever it was, it all came to an end pretty quickly. Because in 1807, New Jersey changed the law to limit the franchise to white men. At the same time, ironically, it loosened the wealth requirement, so you didn't have to have 50 pounds anymore to qualify to vote. That meant that almost all white male citizens could vote, but all black citizens and women could not. So, New Jersey was the first state to allow women to vote for a while. Then, in 1869, Wyoming became the first territorial government to allow women to vote, and when Wyoming became a state in 1890, it was the first state where women could vote in federal elections. And by 1920, when the 19th Amendment was ratified, women had unrestricted suffrage in 15 states, presidential suffrage in 28 states, and many other states had some degree of suffrage before 1920. So this is an incremental process. The first woman to run for federal office was Elizabeth Cady Stanton, famous suffragette. She ran for Congress from New York State in 1866. Even though she couldn't vote, she also knew that no law prevented her from serving in Congress, even though she couldn't vote, even for herself. Obviously, it was a mostly symbolic campaign. She lost. But that was 54 years before the 19th Amendment passed. The first woman elected to serve in Congress was Jeanette Rankin from Montana in 1917, because women in Montana could vote even though the 19th Amendment hadn't been passed yet. So how did the 19th Amendment finally get passed? It took 3 generations of women fighting for suffrage. The first attempt to offer a universal suffrage amendment in Congress was in 1868. The next attempt was 10 years later in 1878 by a California senator named Aaron Sargent, and his bill was, and you talk about the struggles you guys had in the legislature, his bill was introduced every year for the next 41 years. Never give up. Failure is always an option, but giving up before you fail is not an option. Okay, so then in 1919, bill was approved by Congress, and then it was ratified by 3/4 of the states in 1920. Western states led the way. Why? Because they wanted to balance the clout of the big eastern states like New York. New York had approved women's suffrage in 1917. They weren't going to let these East Coast states have more power than them, and they couldn't balance the power out with having more voters. They needed more voters. So in addition to the struggles of 3 generations of women fighting for the vote, it took a lot of activism, blood, sweat, and tears, literally. People cried back then too. There was a lot of opposition to women voting from men and from women. Now remember, the victors get to write the history, and a lot of this is forgotten, but there were just as many anti-suffrage groups as pro-suffrage groups. For instance, there was the National Association Opposed to Women's Suffrage, and it was a female organization. And one of its pamphlets was called 10 Reasons Why the Great Majority of Women Do Not Want the Ballot. And it argued in its pamphlet against the adoption of the 19th Amendment because, this organization said, it would be, quote, an official endorsement of nagging as a national policy. Another reason this group gave for not having women's suffrage, quote, because in political activities, there is constant strife, turmoil, contention, and bitterness producing conditions from which every normal woman naturally shrinks. So, as I said, there was a lot of activism. Susan B. Anthony was arrested in 1872 for trying to vote. In 1871, 200 black women in North Carolina dressed as men and went to the polls to cast ballots. Suffragettes were thrown in jail on the trumped-up charge of blocking the sidewalk when they picketed. They were force-fed in jail when they went on hunger strikes, so this was not a very ladylike crusade. But the history of the fight for women's suffrage is a lesson in how change happens in America. It happens very slowly, and then all of a sudden. Many generations of women fought for the rights to vote before they got it, And the women's suffrage movement used the early 20th century equivalent of social media. There were buttons and tote bags and cookbooks and fans and tea towels, which I think you guys gave out today, and sheet music. But there were also a lot of complications and contradictions in the suffrage movement. Some suffragette leaders used openly racist arguments to give white women the vote. They said giving the vote to native-born white women would counteract the votes of black and immigrant men. Some suffragists wanted the vote so they could vote against immigration from Southern Europe. Some Southern suffragists were humiliated that their former male slaves could vote, but they could not. White suffragists in North Carolina, for instance, promised men that the votes of white women would help guarantee white supremacy. And, of course, after the 19th Amendment was passed, as we heard from Nikki, most African American women in the South were left out, along with African American men. Because of Jim Crow laws, poll taxes, literacy tests, African American women were blocked from voting until the civil rights laws were passed in the 1960s. Before 1963, black women were 5% of the electorate, despite being 11% of the population. And Native Americans didn't even have citizenship at all for much of the early part of the 20th century. So, which you are certainly familiar with that history here in Oklahoma. So the 19th Amendment was meaningless for women who were immigrants, African American, Native Americans, or uneducated. But African American women were part of the suffrage movement, as we heard from Nikki, and I'm going to tell the same story, only maybe with a different detail or two. So, the journalist and suffrage leader, Ida B. Wells, defied the white leaders of the 1913 Women's Suffrage Parade, who told her that black women should march in the back, as you just heard. And in 1912, Mabel Pinghua Lee, Chinese American, rode on horseback at the head of a suffrage parade in New York City to protest the Chinese Exclusion Act, which made Chinese immigrants ineligible for citizenship, and that wasn't repealed till 1943. So, as I said, the suffrage movement was a long, incremental, piecemeal struggle, like every other struggle for rights in the United States. So even though the 19th Amendment was ratified by the required 3/4 of the states in 1920, it took some states a lot longer. Louisiana passed it in 1970. North Carolina ratified it in 1971. And Mississippi brought up the rear. They ratified it in 1984. Oklahoma was no laggard. You guys passed it in February of 2020, which was before, I'm sorry, 1920. That's what I meant. Today is the anniversary. That's what I meant. Yeah. You passed it before it got to the 3/4, of states. So that is the pocket history of how the 19th Amendment got passed. Now, what have women done with their votes since then? Okay, as soon as the amendment was passed, politicians and observers expressed deep uncertainty about how women would vote. In 1920, there was a newspaper headline, quote, "Women's votes baffle politicians' efforts to forecast elections." And another headline, "Anxious politicians of both parties sitting up nights worrying about women's votes." And they haven't stopped since. But women's voting patterns have changed greatly over time. There are two big gaps when you talk about women's votes. One is a turnout gap. At first, in 1920 and the years after that, the rate at which women chose to exercise this new right lagged way behind men. So women's participation in the electorate was way behind men. But over time, women became the majority of the electorate, and they also turned out in greater numbers to vote than men. So since 1996, women have been 10% more likely to turn out than men in presidential elections. And since 1980, a new kind of gap has opened up, and that's what we call the gender gap, which I'm sure you've all heard a lot about. Since 1980, women have generally been more likely than men to support Democratic candidates, and men have been more likely than women to support Republican candidates. That doesn't mean that women vote for Democrats in every presidential election. In 1984 and 88, Republican candidates for president got the majority of women's votes, Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. But in 2000, 2004, 2012, and 2016, a majority of women voted Democrat and a majority of women voted Republican. In the 2016 presidential election, Hillary Clinton won women 54 to 42 over Donald Trump. She also won the popular vote, not the Electoral College, as we all know. She put a lot more cracks in the glass ceiling than she had in 2008. White women did choose Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton, 53 to 43%. Now, in 2018, the national vote for the House of Representatives had the biggest gender gap in American history. Democrats won women in the national vote for the House. That's all of the House races combined. The gender gap was 59 to 40. Democrats won women over Republicans 59 to 40. And I would say the 2018 election was a women-powered election. A lot of it stemmed from the Women's March right after the inauguration. I like to say that the 2018 election wasn't an SDS election, it was a League of Women Voters election. In other words, people weren't pouring into the streets saying, tear the system down, we want a revolution. No. What did they do? They went home, they went to town meetings, they went to school board meetings, they decided they would vote for city council, Congress, mayor, dog catcher, school board, Senate, etc. And that's what they did. It was a little d democratic reform movement. They walked precincts, they registered people to vote, they did what you're supposed to do as an active, engaged citizen of the United States. The other thing that's happened is that party identification has changed over time. Not surprisingly now, women increasingly identify as Democrat, men increasingly identify as Republican. And since the discovery of the gender gap, female voters have attracted tremendous scrutiny and attention from candidates. Where every year we try to find the key group of women that are going to be the swing vote in the current election. Soccer moms, security moms after 9/11. In 2018, it was suburban college-educated women mad at Donald Trump. In 2020, I predict the key group of swing voters are going to be white working-class women. The ones that are movable, that are most up for grabs. And the key issues for women voters have been remarkably consistent for 100 years. Healthcare, education, child safety, now gun safety, pension reform, child support enforcement, domestic violence, family and medical leave, issues that were considered trivial by male lawmakers until women voters made them not so trivial. In 1910, why did women want the vote beyond getting the basic rights of American citizenship? Well, the early suffragists did have a domestic agenda. Most of them wanted to stop child labor. They wanted to institute new labor laws. And yes, of course, many suffragists were anti-immigration, they supported white supremacy, but it was also a period of progressive reform, and the suffrage movement was part of that. And what about women running for office themselves? I mean, we've just seen, an incredible advertisement about why more women should do this. I feel like, I come from ground zero for gridlock and dysfunction, and you guys are the antidote to that. So in 1972, Shirley Chisholm became the first woman to run for president, the first African-American woman elected to Congress, and she ran for president. 1992 was called the Year of the Woman. More women were elected that year than ever before. 24 new women elected to the House. The number of women in the Senate tripled. Of course, went from 2 to 6, but still, it tripled, went up by 300%, right? And from 1992 to 2016, 47 of the 58 minority women who are now serving in Congress were elected. Now, here is the latest number, 127. That is how many women are in Congress now. That was up from 110 in the previous Congress. And there are now a record number of women of color in the House. We also had a slew of firsts in 2018. Congress has its first Native American women, Muslim women, the youngest female member ever, and a defining feature of this record-setting wave of women who came into Congress in 2018 or in 2019 is that it is nearly entirely Democratic. While there are 35 Democratic women freshmen in the House right now, there's only one Republican female freshman, and that's Carol Miller of West Virginia. If you watched the State of the Union, you could kind of see it on the screen. On one side of the aisle, there is a sea of diverse women in colorful suits, many of them wearing white pantsuits for the suffragists, and on the other side of the aisle, a sea of white men in blue suits. So altogether, the number of Democratic women in the House rose by 25 this cycle to 88, and the number of Republican women in the House declined by 10. Republicans now have 13 women in the House. That is the same number of women they had in 1989. So no progress there. The number of Republican women in elected office nationally declined, both at national level, state level. There's 20 Republican women in the House and Senate combined in Washington, but in state legislatures there are 660 Republican women currently serving. That's down from 705. 30% of the Republican men who left their seats, either through retirement, resignation, or defeat in Washington, have been replaced by Democratic women. And about half of the Republican women who left were also replaced by Democratic women. So the Republican Party, there's only one way that they can go, we think, up. They have a lot of work to do. So, do women in elected office act differently, care about different issues? Yes. Studies have shown that they tend to work across party lines more than men. Just the incredible stories about, going into Leslie's office and crying. I mean, that's powerful. Women support each other across party lines. They do tend to vote for legislation that's helpful to women and families, like family and medical leave, equal pay, etc. Now, what happens next with the women's vote? We don't know, but we do know there is tremendous activism among women on both sides of the aisle. There's the Me Too movement, there's the anti-abortion movement. Many anti-abortion groups are led by women. The Susan B. Anthony list is a prominent one. Susan B. Anthony was against abortion. There's all the gun safety organizations like Moms Demand Action. There are the teachers' strikes demanding more funding for K through 12 public education and higher teacher pay. You had one here in Oklahoma. So I would say we've come a long way from the League of Women Voters. And I hope you have a wonderful time celebrating this incredible centennial. And as our president said when he signed the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commemorative Coin Act in November, which directed the Treasury Department to create currency honoring the women who led the fight to pass the 19th Amendment, he said, quote, "Why did it take so long to celebrate the centennial?" Well, centennials only happen every 100 years, and it takes a really long time to go from 0 to 100. So, and so we can have questions? Yeah, okay.
Does anybody have any questions? I'll be happy to Phil Donahue around. Get my steps in. Yes, sir.
Yes. The greatest challenges facing humanity are the environmental threats, including the climate crisis. The president's party still votes as though this is a hoax and a myth. I'd like to know why the national media isn't raising the issue more often and what all of us can do about that.
Geez, I think well, first of all, the national media is not one monolithic thing, but I would say climate change gets a lot of coverage. If you are a consumer of news along a broad spectrum of sources, you will see a lot of coverage of climate change. I mean, just think about Australia on fire, the last couple of months. Climate change is now, I would say, climate change and gun safety are probably the two most important issues for young voters. I think it's a threshold issue now. It's kind of a defining issue. If you want to reach young voters for any issue, you better agree with them that climate change is not a hoax. I mean, because otherwise they're not going to listen to you about anything. There is, climate change is just a huge issue, and you can vote for representatives and candidates that want to do something about it, And the one thing about climate change, it's a really good example of how political polarization makes it almost impossible to solve problems. Because you want to be in a society where everybody starts with the same basic set of facts and then works their way to to different opinions. That's fine. What you don't want to have is everybody starts with opinions and then cherry picks some facts or some made-up facts to support that. It's one thing to say climate change is real, it's mostly caused by human activity, what should we do about it? On one side, you could say we should try to eliminate carbon fuels by some date. On the other side, you could say, hey, it's not worth it if China and India aren't doing anything, let's just adapt. You know, I mean, that's a legitimate debate to have. But if you say that climate change is a Chinese hoax, you kind of can't get anywhere after that. It's kind of like saying, how can there be climate change if we still have snow in the winter? Anyway. So one of the things you can do is have an educated conversation with people who share the same basic facts, but maybe have come to different conclusions.
Thank you. Okay, yes.
I was wondering, do you see the movement to have women run for office as a worldwide movement, or is it really something that is centered just in the United States?
Oh, goodness, no. I mean, the other countries are way ahead of us. Just look at the women, female heads of government. I mean, Margaret Thatcher, Angela Merkel, Golda Meir. I mean, you could just reel them off. We're way behind. No, we are way behind. As a matter of fact, I think in Europe, what, we're not? Oh, why? Why? That is why? Because there are a million reasons, but gender is the main reason, you know, because Americans are more resistant to seeing women in a position of power. You know, there are a million reasons. I mean, look, I don't want to get into this. I know we're not talking about this election, but like the mystery of why Elizabeth Warren, you know, kind of tanked and Bernie did not, even though they were so similar on many issues. I mean, there's a lot of, we have a lot of catching up to do, but we did have a female candidate win the popular vote for president by almost 3 million votes. Now, we don't elect our presidents by popular vote. We elect them on a winner-take-all, state-by-state system. But we have had a woman get the most votes in a presidential election.
Thank you. Next question. Anybody back here? Any? President, did you have your hand raised?
Oh, I think over there.
Yeah.
Oh, you got one.
As a mature white male, I just wanted to say I've rather enjoyed myself tonight.
Well, good.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
for you. I think we all did. Okay. Here we go.
I'm seeing more and more articles about religion in this current administration. A lot of Catholics, a lot of evangelicals, and it feels like the separation of church and state is not something that, and I'm very worried about that. Can you comment on this?
Well, these things are being litigated. There's always going to be a balance between how much religion can you have in a public square, and this is an administration that believes you should have a lot more than we do now. And there are going to be a lot of cases in the Supreme Court that are going to decide how much more we get. You know, and I mean, obviously, like states like Oklahoma are on the front lines of this particular battle. And we're going to see what the new conservative Supreme Court does about it. That's all I can say. Stay tuned.
Thank you.
And vote. Yeah.
We have time for one more from the audience. Anyone have another question? Yes, yours?
Like you, I can't figure out why Elizabeth Warren seems to be sliding.
Well, there are a lot of reasons, but yeah.
Okay. But what do you think that that our shot is to energize 22-year-olds or to attract the middle?
Oh my goodness, both.
Okay.
You can't. I mean, if you're talking about us, meaning Democrats, okay. Just wanted to establish that. Yeah. You've got to do. Oh, okay. Democrats have to do both. They have to energize young people to vote. Now, I will say in 2018, young people and African Americans, especially women, already voted at unbelievable turnout levels. I mean, they are the leaders in this. I think I can't even remember what the turnout was in Alabama. It was something like 95% of African American women turned out. So that's not the issue. It's more like Hispanics and young people who lag behind in turnout really increased their turnout a lot in 2018 at historic levels. They still are laggards, but they did better. So Democrats have to get out young people, minorities, but they also have to reach out to people in the Rust Belt, because the battleground states are states that have higher proportions of white non-college men and women than the nation at large. That's the difference between a national poll, which is useless. I mean, why do we care what a national poll says? Because Democrats live clumped together in the wrong states. I mean, if Democrats were really smart, they'd start a reverse Dust Bowl national migration movement, and some billionaire would give a down payment on a mortgage to every young person who left New York and California and moved to any other state. I mean, that's, the fact is the Democratic voters are inefficiently distributed because they're clumped together in urban areas where their votes are essentially wasted, since we elect our presidents on a winner-take-all state-by-state system. And Republican voters are efficiently distributed in addition to the structural advantage that the Electoral College gives them. The Electoral College advantages real estate over people. So Republican voters are more efficiently distributed throughout rural areas, meaning they're more sparsely distributed, so they have more power. That's why the only solution to this that I can think of is my reverse Dust Bowl migration, young person homesteading program. Yeah.
I'm gonna take the last question for myself.
Yeah.
Because I have the microphone. I
Okay.
can do that. Would you tell us a little bit about your experience finding your voice as a woman in a male-driven, predominantly, you've covered what, 7, 8 presidential campaigns?
Yes, but who's counting?
But who's counting?
I started when I was 10. Ha ha ha.
I would just be really interested to hear about that from your voice.
I would say, the whole thing about the boys on the bus, I kind of came after that. First of all, yes, journalism has more male people in it, but National Public Radio did not. So I'm the second generation of women at National Public Radio, so I didn't have to blaze any trails. Cokie and Linda and Nina and Susan Stamberg did that. So I did not encounter the problems they did. I will say that, this is such a minor point, but when I started at NPR, I was a newscaster, which just did the hard news 5-minute inserts at the bottom of the hour on Morning Edition. And there were a bunch of female newscasters, and I think there was like one male newscaster, and we found out that he was making a lot more money than us. Well, guess what? We got a lawyer, and NPR fixed the problem. The point is, NPR is a responsive organization. It's not perfect. It can change. I haven't had those problems. One of the reasons why, because back then NPR didn't pay very well. So men worked at NPR, and then they got married and were going to have kids. They needed to make more money. They would leave, and they'd go work for a big network. It's kind of like, why are there so many women in teaching? There's a reason for that. But now NPR is competitive financially for salaries, so we have attracted a lot of people who are coming from big news organizations that are either imploding or laying off people. So that's not an issue anymore. So I would say, I had incredible mentors and women who came before me. They used to call Cokie and Linda and Nina the Fallopian Club at NPR. I know people say they're the founding mothers of NPR, but we called them the Fallopian Club. And they were just, all I will say is they literally opened doors for me. Not just figuratively, they weren't just inspiration. It was like Cokie basically said, you're going to work with me in Congress, and I'm going to make that happen. And she did. So I have them to thank. Thank you very much.
Oh, wasn't she wonderful? Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. And another round of applause for our panelists. They were amazing as well.